Hi, this is Lyle Levitt welcoming you to TribFest 23. I hope you're enjoying this weekend of big ideas and important conversations about the future of our state and our country. No matter who you are or what you believe, please be courteous and respectful to everyone around you. And no matter where you call home, thank you for being here. That's right, even if you're not from Texas, the Texas Tribune Festival wants you anyway.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Tamara Keith. I'm NPR's senior White House correspondent and co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. And it is very exciting that you are all here at 9 in the morning on a Saturday. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, that's impressive.
And on behalf of the Texas Tribune, I am thrilled to welcome you to the annual Texas Tribune Festival. For the next hour, we're going to be getting to know Congressman Colin Allred, who represents parts of Dallas and its surrounding suburbs. And we were discussing how it's a very convoluted map at this point. But I think it's safe to say that the reason that we are really here is because he is running to take on Senator Ted Cruz in 2024. And I think that applause helps explain this. But in the first 2 months or so of your Senate campaign, you raised a blockbuster $6.2 million. Which is a big number that a lot of sitting senators would like to have. So for the first 45 minutes or so, I will be asking all the questions, and then it will be your turn in the audience. If you would like to ask a question, please submit it by going to texastribune.org/ask. Darla Cameron from the Texas Tribune will read some of those questions here, and Congressman will answer them. A bit more housekeeping. If you haven't already, please silence your phones. And if you want to tweet, if that is still a thing, and I don't even think it's called tweeting, if you would like to post somewhere, then use the hashtag TribFest23. So let's do a proper introduction now. Congressman Colin Allred represents the 32nd Congressional District. He played in the National Football League for 5 seasons before going to law school. He later worked as a civil rights attorney and served in the Obama administration. He was elected to Congress in 2018 as part of a wave of backlash to former President Trump that swept Democrats into power in the House. He beat a longtime incumbent Republican, and now he is trying to do that again. Allred is running to be the Democrat to take on Senator Ted Cruz next year. So let us start with some news. I think up until late Thursday, it was unclear whether we would both be on this stage or not, because the House of Representatives is having a chaos moment, which is not entirely uncommon, but there is a deadline to fund the government at the end of this month. Do you think that there's going to be a government shutdown?
Yeah. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. And Tamara, thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
You're right. I wasn't sure if we'd be here or in D.C. I honestly would rather be in D.C. avoiding a government shutdown instead of here, because I think that's one of the basics of the job is to keep the government open. And it looks to me like we are barreling towards a shutdown, and I don't really see much of a way out of it at the moment. But I'm still hopeful. I try and stay optimistic. We're going to come back on Tuesday. Maybe the Senate will pass some version of a continuing resolution to keep the government open, and maybe the House will adopt that. But as you know, kind of the choice that the Speaker has to make is whether or not to take the bipartisan deal that's going to be struck in the Senate. And if he does, I think they'll probably try and remove him as Speaker because the right wing is running the House of Representatives right now. And the tail is fully wagging the dog over there. And so it's not a good situation.
I can't believe I'm even asking you this, but do you think there's a chance of a discharge petition?
Actually, I do.
And we should explain what a discharge petition is, although this crowd is very smart. It's is basically a way for the minority to get something on the House of the floor, the House floor, if they get enough signatures.
Yeah, without it going through the speaker, we can force it, and I actually think there is a chance of that. And there are some Republicans who particularly are in districts where I think this is a terrible politics, and also I think maybe they just also think it's the wrong thing to do, who have talked about doing this. And I think that's why it's important that we see a bipartisan agreement coming out of the Senate, because that'll put a lot of pressure on the House to say, well, we've got bipartisan agreement here. Let's keep the government open. We can keep having our battles, but let's move on from this. And so I think that the discharge petition might work there. It has some timing issues. We probably still would have some kind of a shutdown. And there are some issues that are too complicated to talk about here in terms of origination, because the House has to originate spending bills. It's in the Constitution. So there's some issues around that, but I think they can be worked around.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you have no idea how this ends.
Well, if anybody does, they should tell me, because I'm dealing with this every day. And what I've seen is that we have a very weak speaker, and we have a House Republican caucus that's being run by the extremists. And I have some friends on that side who I know this is not reflective of what they think we should be doing. They feel strongly about probably some of the things that are being fought for in this, but this is not the way they want to go about it. And I hope that those folks will stand up and say, listen, we're in the majority. It's our responsibility to keep the government open. We can have these battles, but let's not do it in an irresponsible way. But there are some folks who just got to touch the stove and know it's hot. And I think that there are some folks in that conference who want to.
Well, aren't there at least 15 or so of them who have never voted to fund the government ever?
Right. Well, that's true. And, there are always going to be a few pinch points in this Congress. One of them was going to be the speaker's vote. We saw that with, 15 rounds of votes there. The other was going to be, funding the government. And this is talking about a short-term spending bill. We're not talking about, we have a whole nother year that we have to fund priorities, and we're not even talking about that there are folks in the Republican conference who don't want to support Ukraine, who, it's not just that they think the war effort maybe isn't worth it, it's that they're actually pro-Putin. And there are some folks who don't want to help us kind of deal with the disasters that have hit over the course of this summer. That's one of the requests from the White House, is to refill the disaster aid, because whether it's in Hawaii or just the extreme heat that we've experienced, or just any of the number of natural disasters that we've had and that are still coming, that's part of our responsibilities to respond to that. And so all of that has to be done, and we have to find a way to do it.
Right. So you mentioned the speaker, and there have been numerous threats to his speakership, or implied threats, or outright, Matt Gaetz on the floor of the House threats. Would you vote to back Speaker McCarthy if the question is called and his speakership is on the line? Well,
what we need is for the speaker to say, number one, he already struck a deal with the president when we had the debt ceiling crisis on these spending levels, and then they've gone back on that deal. But there are Democrats like me who are willing and ready to work with the speaker and to meet him halfway or even more than halfway on a number of priorities. But we have to be given a chance to. And right now they're not giving us a chance to. And I understand why, because I think he feels that if he comes to us and gets any Democratic votes, that he'll be ousted as speaker. And that's all on their conference. That has nothing to do with us. But I think that certainly this impeachment inquiry doesn't help. It's kind of a made-up nonsense thing. But at some point he's going to have to decide that, listen, I've been put in this role to lead, and I'm going to have to lead. And that's a decision that we're all still waiting on.
Yeah, so, I guess we'll get there when we get there.
Yeah.
But is there a scenario where Democrats bail him out?
There is. No, there is. And, this has happened before. I served in the Obama administration. You've covered this before. We've had to work because, as you said, there's a lot of folks on the Republican conference who are never going to vote for any kind of government spending bill, and so they've had to come and work with us before. The question is, after doing that, what happens to the speaker? And I think that's what's different this time.
Right. So just to be clear, are you saying that the potential exists for Democrats to help McCarthy out if his speakership is called into question, or just on funding the government?
Well, I mean, I think that's a different question.
Yeah.
And we'd have to see. I think that, I certainly have not been impressed with a lot of the things he's done. But I want to see the House be governed. And folks should understand, if they do a motion to vacate, which is how they get rid of the speaker, all of the committees stop. All legislation stops. We are unable to do anything until that's resolved, right? And we went through a week of that at the beginning of this Congress, where there was no House of Representatives because we were voting on the speaker. We can't go through it again. We're the leaders of the free world. We're the oldest and most important democracy in the world. The world looks to us. We have to show that we can govern. And that's the basic responsibility that we're dealing with.
The world looks to us and says, wow, they're sloppy.
Maybe. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee, though, and I've gone around the world quite a bit. And I'll tell you, the world does look to us. And when our democracy is struggling, it makes it harder for emerging and democracies that are having issues to get by. And so that's why our democracy has always been kind of my biggest priority. Because when we are doing well in our democracy, whether or not, regardless of the choices that our folks are making, but when our democracy is healthy, it helps the whole world. And when we are mired in dysfunction, when we have an insurrection, when we have some of the just kind of unprecedented things that have happened, the questioning of our institutions and systems, the way it's been consistently done, it not only damages us here, it contributes to erosion of democracy around the world.
I want to take a hard right turn. We'll come back to democracy, I swear. Yeah. But you have talked about your experience in the NFL, sort of teaching you that you can work with anyone. Yeah. That people with different ideas and different backgrounds can come together in that locker room for a common cause. How does that compare to your experience in Congress?
Well, we were all on the same team,
Well, I mean, you could all be on America's team.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And John Lewis would say we used to come here. We came here on different ships. We're in the same boat now, right? Yeah. We're all Americans, and I agree with that. No, listen, I feel strongly that everyone who's a legislator should have had to play team sports at some point in their life, right? Because there's basic ideas you learn, like there's something larger than yourself, that you're a part of a group, that you have to work well with others. You don't have to agree on everything, but you can still find a way to get things done. The thing about an NFL locker room that I miss is just how you can have people who are from the most divergent kind of backgrounds, from the countryest boy you've ever met next to the kid who's never left the inner city. They're sitting right next to each other. They're brothers. They're working on the same cause. They can be best friends. And in other walks of life, they probably wouldn't have interacted, And I love that about athletics. I love that about sports. I love how it brings you together around that. To pass legislation, you need 218 votes in the House, 60 votes in the Senate, and have a president who'll sign it. It has to be collaborative. But we have, a lot of folks who, when I was in the NFL, used to call them me guys, who most locker rooms kind of chew up and spit them out. We have, unfortunately, too many of those, I think, right now in the United States Congress.
What do you mean locker rooms chew them up and spit them out? And why does Congress not do the same thing?
Yeah, there's a way. Locker rooms have a way of making people who make everything about themselves, making it known. And you'll see they're guys who float from team to team, and they're talented, but nobody seems to be able to keep them around. It's like, I wonder why. And it's because, the locker room, made it so they weren't welcome, right? And I think that's just a natural aspect of a locker room. I think I come across a lot of people in this job who I think all the time, you wouldn't last a week in a locker room. So.
In politics, though, aren't the incentives a little bit to be a me guy?
Yes and no. I mean, if the incentive is to get something done, which I think it should be, then to get something done, you're going to have to do it collaboratively. Right? There's no single legislation that you can pass on your own, right? Like, you need other folks to work with you on it. Now, you have to lead, but there's a lot of leaders in locker rooms as well. So no, I think you're right. There are certainly some differences, but the kind of basic idea is the same, which is that you don't have to agree on everything. You don't. I mean, like, folks here are married, right? Like, do you agree with everything with your spouse? Like, you don't have to. Like, you focus on the things that you do agree on. You try to spend some time on those, and then, every now and then you cross the bridge when you have to on the stuff that you disagree on. But you try not to spend all of your time on it. Otherwise, it becomes dysfunctional.
Right.
Not that I'm talking about my own,
No, definitely not talking about anyone's own lives. I do want to ask you about your experience on January 6th.
Yeah.
Were you on the House floor that day?
Yeah, I was. So this was during COVID still, so we had a limited number of folks on the floor, but I was in leadership, and so I was there. And, we knew it was going to be a long day. I didn't know it was going to be that kind of a day. But I remember as we were going through the different states, start with Alabama, Alaska, get to Arizona. And at the time, it took one member of the House and one member of the Senate to object. We changed that afterwards. But there's often a member of the House who objects because there's often a lot of crackpots in the House. But there's usually not a senator. And so we get to Arizona, Paul Gosar objects, kind of expected, right? Who's the senator who stands up and objects? The junior senator from the state of Texas, Ted Cruz, right? And I'm sitting there thinking, what does Ted Cruz know about the election in Arizona? And why isn't he spending his time worried about the 30 million Texans he does represent, right? And so we have to split into our separate chambers. The Senate goes back to the Senate, the House stays in the House, and I start getting texts from my staff and from my wife asking me where I am. And I'm getting kind of annoyed because I'm working, I'm on the House floor. Like,
yeah.
To me, I'm in the safest place in the country outside of the White House. I mean, Tamara, like,
yeah.
You have to go through all kinds of layers of security just to get there.
And every time I walk into the White House, every time I walk into the Capitol, you think, like, wow, I'm going through a lot of security right now. I'm walking into a Target, but it's a safe one.
It's a safe one. But of course, my family and my staff was watching a very different story playing out on television. They were seeing, police officers getting beaten up and a mob that was on the steps. And so, they locked all the doors. It's not that dissimilar from here. Lock all the doors, and they tell us to reach under our seats for gas masks that I didn't even know were there. And the doors that the president walks through to give the State of the Union, we were borrowing with furniture that we used to hold paper. And so I sent my wife a text that I never thought I'd have to send in this job, saying, whatever happens, I love you. She was 7 months pregnant. She was at home with our son Jordan, who wasn't yet 2. And I took off my suit jacket because when you're the only former NFL linebacker in the room, and there's a bunch of, let's just say, older legislators there.
Duty calls.
There's something physical that might be about to happen. They look to you for, security. And I honestly thought that, we're going to have to make a stand there. I mean, thanks to the bravery of the Capitol Police and the Metropolitan Police, we got evacuated out. And, my hope over the course of history is that the fact that we had to leave the House floor won't be the most important data point from that day, but that we came back. And at 3 a.m., we certified an American presidential election.
I do want to ask, you came back and you still had colleagues objecting.
Yeah.
And I wonder about the relationships. Mm-hmm. Are things just fundamentally broken over there in a different way? Like, is there a before January 6th and after January 6th?
I think there is. It's also, I think, every single member of the House caucus on the Republican side who voted to impeach the president after January 6th is no longer there.
Right. Including people you're friends with.
Including, Liz Cheney's a friend of mine, Anthony Gonzalez is a friend of mine, I played with him in the NFL. They're not there anymore. And I do think it's changed the relations. But there was a period there, about 48 hours, you remember this, and I'm sure y'all remember, where it seemed like we were going to have a bipartisan agreement that this was too far, that this was too much, that an insurrection, directing a mob to attack the Capitol, that was too much. Kevin McCarthy gave a speech where he placed the blame on the president. Mitch McConnell did the same. It seemed like we were there. And then we've started into this whole process now of just really gaslighting people, about what happened and saying that it was I don't know, government op or all kinds of things, that it was actually Antifa and there shouldn't be any accountability for anything that happened. I'm friends with the Capitol Police who were injured that day. I see them every day. These are the folks who, I walk past every single day. When I was leaving the House floor, I looked back and saw some of the guys who were there with us every day in suits with their guns drawn, holding the doors so that we could get out. I remember thinking, who's going to get them? We just have to, we cannot get into the system now where political violence and if an election doesn't go your way, then you just try and attack the system and you try to tear it down. We just cannot get into that. And that's one of the reasons why Ted Cruz has to lose in this election. Because he was one of the architects of this effort. And he has since then tried to convince the American people that this didn't happen or to try and change the facts. And this is his accountability, this election. And so if you're out there and you care about this, I ask you to get involved with us because we can do it and we don't have to be embarrassed by our senator. We can get a new one.
Well, that's a perfectly good segue to another question I have for you, which is you're like a rising star in the House. You're on a leadership track. You're in a very safe seat now. Why
made it safe?
Yeah. Why give it all up?
Yeah, I'm not giving it up. I'm going to serve in the Senate now. So.
No, I know, but it's you're taking a safe bet to a riskier bet.
Yeah, I don't see it that way. I've got two boys, and I want to make sure that the country I'm delivering to them is one that is stable, that's strong, that's in better shape than the one that was delivered to me. And I feel that this is an inflection point for our country and for our state. We have a senator who is a part-time senator who podcasts 3 times a week, which is a lot.
It's more than I podcast most weeks.
Who is constantly on Fox News, but who cannot be bothered to try and do anything legislatively to help our state, which is actually the job that he's elected to do, not to be a media personality. And I believe in this state. I'm a 4th-generation Texan. My boys are 5th-generation Texans. I was born and raised in Dallas by a single mother. I was a public school teacher. I played football at Baylor, captained the team. My family's from Brownsville. I trained for the draft in Houston. I know who we are, and I don't think this is who we are. And so we have a chance, I think, to send a message to ourselves and to the whole country about Texas in this election. And I feel really strongly about it. And so that's why I'm running. It has nothing to do with safe seat, not safe seat. I got in my seat by picking a seat to run in that he'd been unopposed in the previous election, my opponent. There was no Democrat on the ballot in 2016 against him. He was a 22-year incumbent. He was the chairman of the Rules Committee. He was thought to be part of the furniture, right? Like, he wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
They gave me a 10% chance to win that election a few months out from it. We beat him by nearly 7 points. Had a tough re-election. So, we know how to run. I know how to run in races like this. And I know what it takes. And I know that there are Republicans out there who are thinking I'm a Republican, but I'm not that kind of a Republican. I have a lot of folks who voted for me who drove around with W stickers on the back of their car, big George W. Bush fans. There's independents who are looking for a home. And our challenge in our state is that 9.5 million registered voters didn't vote in the last election. And as a voting rights lawyer, that bothers me as well. And so we're going to do everything we can to engage our fellow Texans in this election. And so we have so much room to grow. We're a dynamic, diverse state. We're growing incredibly rapidly. We're picking a senator who's going to be electing us, who's going to be representing us until 2030, where we're going to be in a totally different place as a state in the country. We need to have a forward-looking senator, one who I think represents who we really are, and that's why I'm running.
So you talk about this sort of untapped wealth of Texans who haven't voted, who are probably pretty beaten down by being, at least some of them are Democrats, being Democrats in a state where Democrats haven't won statewide in a long time, and where maybe they don't feel like their voices are heard. In particular, Democrats especially have talked for a long time about there's this huge population of Latino voters and we just need them to vote for us. So what specifically is your plan to fix that challenge? Which I think is like one of the great challenges for any Democratic effort to run statewide.
Well, we have huge numbers of all kinds of folks who aren't voting, unfortunately. And in my experience, both as a voting rights lawyer and as a candidate, there's no secret to turning someone who's a maybe voter or sometimes voter or not a voter into a voter. It's just hard work because you're helping them oftentimes overcome so many other things. And there's the laws, of course, which I think in our state, unfortunately, we have some of the worst voting laws in the country, whether it's on voter registration or actually when you go to the polling place, and then after that we dilute your vote through gerrymandering. But the way you turn these folks into voters is by just basically helping them stay informed on what's happening, how to comply with these things, how to get over these hurdles, why they should vote, and it's just constant interaction and touches. And that's what we've done in my congressional races. There's no secret to it. It's just hard work. It's at folks' doors. It's on their phones. It's interacting with them every single way that you can to try and inform them about how this election is going to impact their lives. Because I often tell folks, people are not just not voting because they don't care. They're voting in part, maybe sometimes not voting because they think it's not going to change anything in their lives. And that's something that we have to make sure that we drive home what the difference is. Because the senator that I will be for them is so much vastly different than the senator that they've had in Ted Cruz, and we have to make sure they know that.
Do you have, I know you just raised a ton of money, and I will ask you more about that later, but do you have, and I'm sorry to the audience, but I'm now going to ask some tactical political questions. Apologies. But do you have the resources to build that infrastructure? And because it's one thing to have a lot of contact with people in the suburbs of Dallas, but this is a very big state. So can you do that on your own with your campaign? And do you think that you will be getting the national political support to actually be able to do that?
Well, I'm really proud that in our first 2 months, yes, we raised a lot of money, but that it came from 100,000 donors, and that it was from folks giving $5, $10, whatever they could afford, and that means a lot to me. When people send in like a handwritten check for $6, sometimes that almost moves me more because I know the choice that person is making, right? Because I remember, my mom and I struggled growing up. Every now and then, she would want to contribute to something, and what she gave meant more to her probably than somebody who had a lot of disposable income, right? And so it means a lot to me. And yes, we're going to have the resources to do it, but this is not just the project of this election or of our campaign. This is the project for Texas, for us, for decades, and it's going to be a project that is really important for our democracy, that we all understand that regardless of how the elections outcomes are, that it's unacceptable that we're in the bottom 10 of states every election in voter turnout, and it's having terrible impacts on our politics. It leads us to have more extreme people be elected who aren't really reflective of our state and who are then taking actions that are actively hurting our state. And we're seeing that all the time, whether it's the impeachment trial that we just had for our Attorney General, or producing a senator like Ted Cruz, who, as I said, I don't think has been very serious about representing the state. It's had a ton of negative outcomes, but it also, I think, what I'm hearing increasingly around the country is kind of an image of Texas that's not the Texas I know, and it's one that I think for us is going to have economic outcomes as well, because I'm hearing from our universities and from our business leaders about how it's harder to recruit and retain top talent to come to our state, because you might have fewer rights if you're a woman. People might be questioning whether or not you belong if you're LGBTQ+. That's not the state that I know, right? And so for us, this campaign is going to be about engaging as many Texans as possible. But also, as I said, there are folks out there who are Republicans or independents who I believe that we can talk to. I've been very pro-business in my time in Congress. I've been endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in both of my last 2 elections, as well as the AFL-CIO. I was literally just awarded as the most bipartisan member of the Texas delegation. In this election, the choice in front of Texans will be between literally the most bipartisan member of the Texas delegation and probably the most extreme senator in the country. And so I do believe that we can win the middle, and we can get folks who are thinking, I don't always vote for a Democrat, but I could vote for him, and I can get involved in this election.
The fundraising quarter is almost over. Want to make any news? How's your fundraising going?
Well, listen, every quarter is important because of the media narrative, but also, as you said, the task for us here is to engage people and to make sure that every Texan knows, the differences in this race, what I want to do, and where we can go together. So I'll ask everybody to take out your phones, text Texas to 90678, and get involved with us.
Oh, yes.
That's right.
An ad has occurred. So Beto O'Rourke got very close to, we got within a couple of points of Ted Cruz the last time around. He was a candidate who was very exciting to Democratic voters. And he was not really like leaning as hard into the I just want a bipartisan award thing as you. Do you, I mean, no, not to discount a bipartisan award. But do you think that there is a place in politics for bipartisanship in this current climate? And how do you excite people who are who want to be excited by, like progressive bomb throwing? And I'm not phrasing this particularly well, but it feels like there's like a pretty narrow area to thread to like not alienate Republicans or not alienate some Republicans while still exciting Democrats.
I just have to be myself. And, listen, I'm a black civil rights lawyer. I care about, I don't, sacrifice my values. When I'm in the Senate, we will pass the voting rights legislation to even and protect the right to vote. We will codify Roe v. Wade. I voted to do that in the House. We'll do it in the Senate. There are so many things that we have to get done. But I also hear all the time, and I'm sure you all hear this in your own conversations, folks who are saying, does it have to be this bad, right? The politics, does it have to be, a collection of just people arguing and never getting anything done and shutting down the government and having crisis after crisis after crisis? And the answer is no, it doesn't have to be this bad. If you elect people who run on that they're going to be the most divisive senator in the country, then don't be surprised when they are, right? And if you elect somebody who's telling you and has a record of bipartisanship, and who, while I know I'm not going to agree with everything of my Republican colleagues, I'm going to try and find the things that we do agree on and get those things done, then if you reward that, you'll get more of that, right? And so, I think folks are going to be really fired up. We've just doing a tour of the state. We've already seen a lot of that. But the task for us as Texans, isn't just to, I think, in this election, vote in this election, but to be engaged in our democracy. And that's the thing I keep talking about and thinking about because it's resulting in extreme results for us across the board and in multiple elections, and it's a huge threat to our state. And so, yes, I plan on beating Ted Cruz. And then after that, we have to have, even increased turnout in the next election and the next election, all of that. We have to make sure that in this state, we start making being involved in our democracy a part and more a part of our culture.
Which I think has, as you say, been a challenge recently. Yeah. So it's sort of an indelicate question, but when I told people I was interviewing you, some people asked this as well, which is your campaign, is there a risk that your campaign is just like a money pit for liberal dreams? And I'm sorry to ask it in an indelicate way, but every cycle there is a Democratic candidate in a red state who gets a lot of donations because people really want to get rid of Lindsey Graham or really want to get rid of Mitch McConnell or really, really want to get rid of Ted Cruz. And in the end, it's just a lot of money. And then they don't win.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about those other states, but I know about Texas. And I know we're ready for this. And we're talking about somebody who was very narrowly, as you said, reelected in his last election. If you just took out the fact that it was in Texas and you just looked at it objectively, you'd say, this is a competitive race. It's a competitive race right now. I know that. I think Ted Cruz knows that. We're in a tight race right now. The question about whether or not I win or not is going to be, what do we do between now and then on November 5th? Because that's when, of course, the rubber's going to meet the road. But listen, I've never lost an election. I don't plan on starting now. And like I said, people have to realize, when I ran for Congress in the seat that I ran in, people told me I was crazy. And by the end of it, I was like, oh, well, of course you won. I mean, what do you mean?
I've been predicting it all along.
Right. And so I look forward to proving kind of the naysayers wrong. But also, I'm relying on Texans. I can't do this alone. Our campaign can't do it alone. We have a choice. We have a choice. We have a senator who is not doing the job, who, whether it's the infrastructure bill, let's bring $35 billion to our state over the next 5 years, votes against it. Whether it's the Chips and Science Act, bring high-tech manufacturing to our state, votes against it. When John Cornyn helps to push through the Safer Communities Act, the first time in 30 years we've done anything on gun violence, votes against it, right? What is he voting for? What is he doing for our state other than getting on TV and podcasting, right? So that's the choice that we have. If that's the choice that Texans make, then obviously we'll have to respect it. But I don't think that's who we are. I think we're going to go in a different direction.
I do want to ask, you have a primary.
That's right.
How are you feeling about that?
I feel good about it, but it's the same thing we have to do in every election. I had a 7-person primary in 2018. I had a runoff. I won by 20, 40, and 6.5. So I'm used to having to take the hard path.
Yeah. We have about 10 minutes before audience Q&A, and I do want to ask you just some issues questions. Though I guess I'm starting with a politics one, so apologies. But obviously, you're trying to be on the ballot in November 2024. Is Joe Biden the right person to have at the top of the ticket?
Well, listen, I think there's nothing unusual about an incumbent president running for re-election. What I think is unusual is that we're probably going to see on the other side nominate the same person for the 3rd time in a row. I think that's unusual in American history. I think, I could be wrong, but I think the last time that happened was FDR. And I think that's strange. But listen, this election is going to be about Texans talking to Texans, neighbors talking to neighbors, right? Ted Cruz is our problem, and we're going to be the ones who solve it. It's not going to be about the presidential level or about the national scene. We have enough here within our state to handle this on our own.
Is there, this is another politics question, and I apologize, but let's say it is a rematch. Polls indicate nobody wants to see that, or most people don't want to see that. Is there a risk of just voters being grumpy or turned off or, just not engaged because of it?
Well, we've got to do everything we can to overcome whatever's going on. And, I think here in Texas, as I said, we have the votes and the energy and the resources to be able to do this. And so that's just what we got to do every single day. And as I said, the choice here is going to be pretty stark. The most bipartisan member of the Texas delegation versus the most extreme senator in the country. And that's a choice for all Texans. Whoever comes out in this election, and we're going to try and make sure that we make it a big one, that's going to be their choice.
Okay, so this is sort of lightning roundish, but none of them are yes or no questions, so let's see how we do. New York Times headline today, nearly 9,000 people being apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border every day. Whatever that lull was seems to be over, and there is a real surge happening. Is the federal government doing enough?
No, and I don't want to lightning round this one.
Fair.
Because I feel very strongly that folks like Ted Cruz are part of why we're in this situation. Because what he likes to do is, put on his outdoor gear and go to the border and get in the weeds and kind of point out migrants, when what he should be doing is getting in D.C. and trying to find a bipartisan compromise here.
I mean, the last time there was any real effort at that was, 2013?
That's right, exactly right.
Were you in law school? It was...
No, was I? I was interning in the White House, yeah.
Yeah.
But
It was ancient history.
Well, there's legislation right now. Veronica Escobar has a bipartisan bill that I'm supporting, the Dignity Act. It's building on the same three pillars that we've seen, whether it's George W. Bush and Ted Kennedy, or as you're referring to Barack Obama and the Gang of Eight, which is securing the border. Every country has to secure its border, but it doesn't have to be done in a barbaric way. And what we're seeing, and particularly from our governor, I think is, to me, terrible, but also not reflective of who we are, and ineffective, which is maybe most important, I guess, if you're talking about how we're actually going to deal with this. Because securing the border, the components around that are that you take some of the pressure off of our CBP agents who are having to do so much processing, and you let them do what they should be doing, which is actually securing the border and looking for the illicit fentanyl and other drugs that are coming across. And I've been in those stations. I've seen the task that they have while also managing our biggest trading relationship in the world. And it's a big job, and we need them to be focused on their job and not a whole bunch of administrative things that shouldn't be within the scope of what they're doing. We need to process people faster for asylum claims so that we can treat them consistent with our values, but also asylum is not going to be available to everybody. It's just not true that, that we can handle all of the ills of Central America and South America through the asylum process. That's not how it can operate. And so we have to secure the border, have a pathway to citizenship, and kind of deal with the folks who are here, but also better match our immigration system to meet the needs of our economy. Because I hear from business leaders all the time across our state that this is what they want. They need more workers. They need, from whether it's Texas Instruments in my district that wants the highest tech workers out there, or whether it's the father and son roofing company that can't find enough folks to throw up a roof on a building when it's 110 degrees because it's a tough job. They need more workers, and they're demanding that we do this. And so, and the other thing I'll say is that part of what these smugglers and human traffickers rely on is our inaction and the misinformation that they can use then to try and tell people this is the time to go to the border. And so this is a multi-decade process now that we've been in. We're seeing these surges, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry for them, $7.5 billion annually of smuggling these people. And it's partly built on our inaction in D.C. And so, yes, I don't think the federal government has done enough. I think the Biden administration can do more, but the Congress has to act. And we have to pass, for the first time since the Reagan era, some kind of comprehensive immigration reform.
Now we'll try the lightning part.
Okay.
We're going to fail. Okay. We're absolutely going to fail. President Zelensky of Ukraine was just in Washington. Do you support the $24 billion request for additional
Absolutely.
aid?
And I went to Ukraine a month before the war started. I'm incredibly proud of the role that we've played in allowing them to defend themselves. I think the United States should be very proud. We should all be proud of how kind of the free world has come together to oppose the Russians, and we need to continue to support them.
Is there a limit, I guess, is there a limit to your support? They're going to need more money next year. This $24 billion only goes through the end of the year.
Well, of course.
And it hasn't even been approved yet.
Yeah, well, of course. There's, at some point we'll have different discussions. But right now, they're in the midst of what is, largely successful operations. They're at the, kind of the peak of what they're trying to do. And they're trying to defend their country that was invaded by a dictator who's trying to reconstitute the Soviet Union. And so, Vladimir Putin could end this war today if he just withdraws his troops back to the Russian borders. And what we have done together with our allies in NATO and in Asia and really the free world together, we have stood up to this dictator. And that has sent a message to other dictators who are watching closely as well. And this fight could come to our shores. After Ukraine, it's a bunch of NATO allies right there. And Article 5 is in place. The only time we've ever used it is when we went to Afghanistan and our NATO allies went with us when we were attacked. And so this is a fight worth having. And for us, it's a relatively small cost of supporting, I think, a brave democracy.
On voting rights, short of getting 60 Democrats in the Senate, is there a path to restoring the Voting Rights Act?
Well, it's funny you say that because I often tell folks, and they don't believe me, really, that in 2005, George W. Bush reauthorized the Voting Rights Act after it passed the Senate, I think with a 91-0 vote, right?
This used to be easy.
This was not controversial not that long ago. And so I would like to believe that we could find a bipartisan way to protect the right to vote. But should that not be available, the filibuster shouldn't stand in the way.
There you go. Do you support voter ID requirements?
I think, listen, we've always had voter ID in Texas. I remember going with my mom to vote when she would bring a bill.
Yeah.
It just was your name and address. And now we've changed it to a photo voter ID that was so limited that you couldn't use a student ID, and you couldn't use an out-of-state ID, you couldn't use an ID that was expired, which some folks aren't driving anymore. There are all kinds of problems with that. And so if you're going to do it, you have to do it fairly. And that's just the thing. I think there's a possible world where, we issue voting IDs to everyone. And this is something I've talked about before. If that's the concern, if you look at any kind of voter fraud, it's usually not done in person like that. If that's the concern, though, then let's do this right. You get a Social Security card when you're born. Let's give you a voter ID card, and it travels with you. And voter registration to me should be automatic when you turn 18. Other democracies have taken these steps, and they've seen enormous increases in participation. We are in a policy choice right now of why we have so few people engaging.
On gun policy, do you support President Biden's push for an assault weapons ban?
I want to see us do something to save lives. And I was proud that for the first time in 30 years, we passed the Safer Communities Act, which, while it didn't do as much as some would like, it was, I think, hopefully an icebreaker that gets us moving on this issue. Because after Uvalde, when I dropped my kids off at their school, I saw in the eyes of all the other parents the same look, which was one of kind of mass trauma. That what if it's our kids' school today? And our public places are becoming memorials. There's a mall north of my district in Allen that I used to know because it was an outlet mall where you could go to get a good deal. Now it's been the site of one of our most recent mass shootings. And we are experiencing this far too often. We're the only major country that has this. We're not more violent than other countries. We don't have more incidents of mental illness. We have too easy access to weapons that are too destructive. And so, to me, there are bipartisan deals to be made right now on background checks, on raising the age to purchase semi-automatic rifles, on red flag laws that can save lives right now and stand in 75, 80, even north of that percentage of the American people support, that the majority of gun owners support. And I think that's where we have to start. Because to me, what we've seen, when you see this kind of inaction, and something in an issue like this gets stuck in the mud, and you're not able to deal with public safety, which is really what we're talking about here, then it gets to a place where you just have to be able to move past that to even have, I think, a productive conversation. So to me, that's where we should start. I think when I'm in the Senate, we can get that done.
So that's not a big, huge endorsement of an assault weapons ban, but of a more moderate approach, which is in line. We have not very much time, but I want to ask you about abortion before we get to questions.
We should talk about that.
You say that you want to sort of recodify Roe.
Yes.
SB 8 existed under Roe. So
that's true.
Are you talking about more than just codifying Roe?
Well, unfortunately, I think the Supreme Court should not have allowed that, and I think that was a terrible decision. What's happening in our state is a disaster. And the stories are heartbreaking. There are lawyers, not doctors, determining whether or not a woman is sick enough for her pregnancy to be terminated. We have victims of rape and incest who have nowhere to go. And they're talking about limiting interstate travel for women in this state. What are they going to do? They're going to board the plane and ask the women on there, what's the nature of your travel, ma'am? Can I ask you where you're going and why? Does that sound like freedom to anybody? I mean, it's unacceptable. We are fully in the post-Roe world here.
Yeah.
And it is a dark one. And for 50 years, we had an established standard that I think folks came to rely on and expect, and whether you agreed with it or disagreed with it, I think we all landed in a place where it was acceptable to the American people. We should reestablish that. We can do it legislatively. I voted to do this in the House. We've not been able to get enough votes in the Senate, thanks to folks like Ted Cruz. When I'm in the Senate, we'll make this into law.
It is time for audience questions, so Darla, if you want to come out. And I'm sorry for compressing us.
Hey,
Got
no
about
worries.
10 minutes.
Thank you for your questions. Hey, I'm Darla Cameron with the Texas Tribune. The first one, what did you learn from Beto O'Rourke's race against Ted Cruz?
Well, I would say that we're going to build on that race. I think it was important to show that so many Texans were ready to move on. And, you know, I used to, in the NFL, we'd always say we learned more in defeats than we did in victories. And so we have to learn from what didn't work and apply what did and try and move on from there. And so there's a lot that we have learned, and we'll be applying it. We just probably won't talk about it in this setting.
What do you think draws Texas Latinos to Trump and the Republican Party?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the beginning of the sentence?
Yeah, what do you think draws Texas Latinos to Trump and the Republican Party?
Well, I'm not sure that that's entirely true. I think there's some of that that's going on. But I think that we have to make sure that we're on the right side of the economic message. If people think that we want to defund the police and you work in law enforcement, probably not going to vote for you. They think that you're against oil and gas and they work in oil and gas, probably not going to vote for you, right? These are things that I certainly, that's not where I am, and I'll try and make sure that all Texans know that. But fundamentally, I think, we have to talk about the economy and who wants to do what for folks in the economy. That I want to lower costs and expand opportunity and invest in the things that are going to grow our economy. Whereas I think mostly what Ted Cruz wants to deliver is culture wars and talk about which companies are woke, which companies should be boycotted or something like that. And so that's what this, I'm happy to have this economic fight because I think that I have a record of supporting the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement that I think would not have gotten done were it not for me and a few other Texas Democrats who pushed that through, of supporting important investments in our economy. And also, I understand what makes our economy run here in Texas, and I'll be supportive of those things, and I'll be supportive of those jobs.
Thank you. What do you make of Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson switching parties from Democrat to Republican?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it really matters. I mean, in my experience, as you mentioned, I've got a number of cities in my district, and I have had different cities over different times. I've worked with mayors from both parties. Most of these issues are not partisan, and I've never had a partisan discussion around trash pickup. So I think that you'd have to ask him in terms of the decision making. But I don't. It's not going to change my approach, and I don't think it's really indicative of anything.
I want to follow on. Do you think that he's going to run for your seat as a Republican?
I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
What's your plan to combat disinformation and win over voters who are drawn to it?
Now, this is a really important question because unfortunately I think that this has become a big task in every election. And I've dealt with this in my congressional races as well. And to me, this is why I've always believed so much in kind of grassroots campaigning and talking to folks at their doors and being present in communities. It's very hard to believe conspiracy theories about somebody or to have disinformation work when you're actually having real world conversations. And this is one of the things I think we suffered from in 2020 when we weren't able to be having these interactions because of the pandemic, and that I'm glad to see we getting back to in 22. I think we'll be even more revived here in 2024. And to me, there's just no substitute for that human interaction.
Do you think the Democratic Party is currently aligned to make progressive changes? And if not, how do you hope you'll contribute to a change in direction for the party?
That's an interesting question.
The audience here asks good questions.
Yeah. I think we had one of the most productive Congresses in recent American history in the last Congress, and a lot of what we did was bipartisan, actually. The infrastructure bill was bipartisan. The CHIPS and Science Act, it was bipartisan. You can kind of go down the list, And some of the major accomplishments that we got done were bipartisan. The issue we've had is that I think we have folks like Ted Cruz in the United States Senate who then attack their colleagues who are trying to find that common ground. And so, I don't know that where the direction of the party specifically is going. I know that for me, I'm a Texas Democrat, and I'm my own kind of Democrat. I believe in voting rights. As I said, I think that we have to protect civil rights. I'm extremely concerned with the way LGBTQ plus Texans are being attacked in the state, and I think it's unacceptable. And I think we have to pass the Equality Act of the United States Senate. I voted to do that in the House. But I also understand what has made us successful as a state, but also what's holding us back. And that's where I think I want to take us. And I think here in Texas, as a Texas Democrat, that's a different Democrat than a national Democrat, and it should be. Because I'm not trying to be a national representative, I'm trying to represent 30 million Texans.
How do you plan to advance gun control policies in a state that is primarily against any of those regulations?
Yeah. I mean, I actually grew up in a state that I think is one that has a long history of responsible gun ownership. And I have learned this later, Tamara, I don't know about your experience, but I learned this later. I went to a camp called Camp Grady Spruce, a YMCA camp, at Possum Kingdom Lake, where we did canoeing, swimming, and riflery, right? And they taught us how to safely and responsibly handle a firearm, right? And I learned later that outside of Texas, that's not as common.
I did not get that at the arts camp I went to, but...
To have riflery, as a component, giving a 7-year-old a rifle, right? But that's the Texas that I grew up in. Visiting my grandmother in South Texas, get off and see folks with, a shotgun in the back window of the truck. But it was responsible. And that's what I think we have to get back to, and away from this kind of, I don't know, now it's just fully in the culture war context, where, it's not really about people's, right to possess a firearm, which I support, or their right to have it for self-defense or for sporting purposes or whatever it may be, that it's actually about, that this is my way of saying that, I'm against, any kind of responsible regulation of anything, and that's just not where we can be as a state or as a country. So to me, the Texas I know is one that has a long tradition of responsible gun ownership. We always have had a high rate of gun ownership. We always will. And that's certainly something that I'll protect in the United States Senate. But at the same time, I don't want us to see us continue to be the state with the most mass shootings in the country.
I do want to just jump in there. There is, I think it's tracker video of you saying that, would we be better off without the Second Amendment? Not an exact quote, but that video is going around, as it does when something like that is caught on tape. How are you going to sort of explain that when it shows up in a million ads?
It's a highly edited take that's not reflective of what I think. So that's what they want to go with. That's fine. I've got a record we can also talk about. But also I'll be talking about what I hear from folks all the time, which is that while they support the Second Amendment, they think that we do have a right to carry and to protect ourselves, that folks are fed up with the idea that any one of our public places could become the next site for somebody who shouldn't have access to a rifle coming in and doing something horrible, and that they're scared, whether it's their synagogues or their churches, their places of worship, or their malls, or our schools. And we don't have to live like this, and that's just the way it is. And we have to find ways forward that I think are within the context of our Constitution, respectful of individual rights, and it is possible. And this kind of straw man argument of, it has to be on either extreme, I reject that. We don't have that in any other area, and I don't know why we can't here. I think this is part of kind of the culture war that Ted Cruz is the only thing he's good at delivering, and certainly it's not going to help our state.
All right, last question. Do you believe some politicians or members of the public view your accomplishments as a threat to their status quo? If so, how do you overcome that?
Well, I'm not supposed to be here. I mean, I'm not. You know, I never met my father. I was raised by a public school teacher and her sister and her husband, my aunt and uncle. My aunt was also a teacher, and my uncle worked for FDA. I went to public schools in Dallas. It was a big deal for my family when I got a scholarship to play at Baylor. We could not have afforded that. And you know, I've worked incredibly hard for everything I've gotten, but I had a lot of support. And I don't think that stories like mine should be unique. And I don't think you should have to be an athlete to be able to find your way out and to have social mobility and upward mobility in our state. And I think we're leaving so much potential on the table. And I tell people this all the time. You know, the next Einstein might be sitting in one of our public schools, and we need to make sure that she has everything she needs to become that. And I'm telling you, and we have a ton of potential that's going unrealized because we're not giving folks a chance. And I think we'd be surprised at how far they'll go with it when they do. Maybe I'm an example of that. And you know, it is true that folks like me usually don't end up in the United States Congress or running for the Senate, but maybe that shouldn't be the case either.
All right, well, thank you here, everyone, for the excellent questions. Colin Allred, Congressman, thank you so much for spending an hour with us.
Thanks, Tamara.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.